to talk a little bit about Node.js at massive scale. So you've probably heard over the last couple of days and a number of times in a number of different ways how widely Node and JavaScript are being used. Some interesting stats being thrown around, things like 10 million instances of Node running every day, or 800,000 packages on NPM, right? So Node and JavaScript are growing constantly, their use and adoption. And so what we wanted to talk about a little bit is how these folks and their organizations are capitalizing on that growth and that technology at the scale that these organizations use it at. So I'm going to let each of you, we'll start with AD, kind of introduce yourselves and maybe talk a little bit just real quick about like why, maybe why you chose Node.
Sure. Again, my name is AD Slaton. I'm the principal architect for CNN Digital under Turner. And I've been doing that for 6 years. And we started with Node with Node 0.10 in 2014. At the time, we wanted to push the envelope in regards to how we were writing our technologies. At the time, we were writing Java, and we're using this thing called, this templating language called FreeMarker. You laugh, right? Exactly. So that's exactly why we chose to go in a different direction. One, we knew that JavaScript was a language that was picking up momentum, and this was in 2014. And at that time, we took the risk of rewriting all of CNN.com in Node 0.10. Yes, and we knew about the callback hell, we knew about the religious wars around event emitters. There were promises at that time, but you know, we were going through it. But we chose to go with Node because of, one, we knew it was single-threaded, but we knew it was pretty fast. We compared it at that time against Go, and we chose Node. And we're still on Node, and we're rewriting many of our systems in Node. We're React shop. We're a Docker shop. So Node is prevalent throughout CNN and also inside of Turner.
Awesome. Jessica?
Hi, my name is Jessica. I'm a software engineer at Pinterest. I've been there about 4 years, and I've also seen a similar transformation with our website, also beginning around 2014. We are a Python shop, or we were, and our website, Pinterest.com, is served by Python. I'll get to the is in a second. We had started with a Django stack serving our Python requests, our web Python requests. And we knew, as AD was saying, we wanted to be part of this new burgeoning community of JavaScript. So React was in our sites, and JavaScript in general, like our client, is completely built with JavaScript, obviously. So just going between Python and JavaScript was something that we just didn't really want to do anymore. And Node was really the path there. So we couldn't rewrite the entire site, and we needed to actually look at an iterative approach. There's just too many developers working on Pinterest.com. So what we started with is our first kind of baby Node process service was template rendering, as well as data marshaling. So these two kind of subcomponents of our Django Python stack was the first thing that we migrated to Node. And so we're still actually in the process of going full Node, so we still do have Python, which is why there's the is. But there are bigger parts of our website now being served by Node, and we are doing active experimentation, transforming parts of it to Node. So it's been exciting.
Cool. Mike?
So Mike Hiskes, I'm a principal architect for Lowe's Digital, which is the e-commerce properties. I think AD's got me beat by which version of Node they started with. So we were a traditional, still are to some extent, a traditional Java shop. Our e-commerce site runs on a package commerce platform. About 2015, the business wanted to do a total UX overhaul. And doing that through the JSPs in our current architecture would have been very, very, very difficult. the business wanted to be able to iterate over that architecture as well. So we started researching and came across Node, realized this was a technology that was going to take off. We actually started with .12, so we dipped our toe in the water with our product list, product detail pages, small parts of the site, just to make sure that what we were doing made sense. To pretty great success. Lowe's was is still today a pretty traditional company, so it's hard to get these things, into production. So today, I would say that Node is a language or a framework that we'll use more prevalently in our architectures.
Awesome, and
Hey, I work on Netflix, so I would say for us, I don't want to repeat the same stories. It's very similar. Our gateway drug kind of into Node was in 2014 when we were developing using Node for the first time for our website, so netflix.com. And since then, I think Node's really excelled in the intervening 4 years is really for like the back end for front ends. And so for us, we saw that really great opportunity where a lot of our UI platforms and UI clients are all written in JavaScript. And so it gives developers this really easy transition for them if they want to build their backends to use Node to be able to do that as well. And so from this little project where we were just hosting the website on Node to today where, we're in the middle of this migration where potentially 100% of all the traffic coming from the clients in terms of data requests and playback requests, that's all going through Node, and that's a huge transformative change at the company. And I think at the same time, as we're scaling up and going and supporting, 130 million customers and subscribers, and the sheer scale that we're running at, it's really, we've also engaged quite a lot with the community and with the TSC and with the working groups because we're pushing at the seams and the boundaries of whether it's diagnostic tooling or performance or debugging or whether to use callbacks or promises, all of those things we're kind of pushing against those boundaries and working closely with the community. And I think that's the one nice thing about Node too, unlike some other runtimes out there where it's fully done in the open source. The governance is open source as well, and so if there are things that you want to do, if there are things that you want to provide, if there are things that you want to contribute, you can make a difference. That's I think some other things that people often forget that's really great about Node is it's completely done in the open.
Very cool. So you've all kind of talked a little bit about the architectures that you have, but maybe we could get just with the topic, are there particular features of your different architectures or different technologies you use or whatever to scale Node into hundreds, thousands, tens of thousands of instances or whatever? Love to hear how maybe you're doing things differently. Sure. Or the same.
Yeah, sure. So I'll start.
No, go ahead.
Of course, we utilize Docker. We've been on Kubernetes for 2 years. And we begin to leverage clustering. So we have some of our APIs utilize clustering, and that's built inside of Node to scale up. So what we try to do at CNN is really, because we serve things like the elections, we serve things like what's going on with the hurricane. We try to write our services so that one, they can perform with the CDN, but they can be almost self-healing. But today we try to ensure that we write our applications so that they can scale with the clustering feature, and also that we're not being redundant in regards to how we write our applications, so they can scale well with the CDN, and how we purge the CDN, how we try to have forever cache. So we do those types of things.
I would say we're similar. Right now, we're looking more towards the cloud-native Kubernetes. We're not there yet, but definitely something as we start to think about the next generation of what our e-commerce platform would be. That's where we'll go with containers and Kubernetes. Right now, it's basically just processes in PM2. It's similar to the architecture that we went with when we started. We do utilize heavy caching on a CDN, so. With an e-commerce site, there's a lot of static assets around the site that are fairly easy to leverage the caching layer to do. So our overall Node implementation is not that great as far as the number of processes that we run. since we went just live with a product list and product detail pages, the majority of the site and the majority of the clients that are coming into Lowe's.com and Lowe's for Pros are going through Node applications to get to our APIs on the back end now. So it's really prevalent in our system.
Awesome. So, and it's interesting to hear kind of the differences, right? Like, you're talking about, obviously, like, if there's a hurricane and there's a ton of people and you're scaling up via instances, but for Lowe's, even just the performance that Node has itself, you're not necessarily having to scale up instances. It's able to just keep up on its own.
I mean, we measure for peak performance every year, right? So we have the holidays, we have Black Fridays that we have to worry about. So every year we kind of measure that growth. And so if we predict or if we anticipate that there's going to be some growth, we'll scale instances horizontally. But yeah, the caching layers and what we put in place there really help with that, right? So,
awesome.
I mean, I think it's kind of, in this respect of like scaling, Node's not really any more different than any other runtimes. You still need all the same things. You need, like good retry strategies and good RPC mechanisms and load balancing, and you need metrics and alerts and all of that to be able to monitor the system and see what's happening. I think the great thing about Node is that it's so much more accessible for your customer base, so that you can get more customers and developers on it, and that naturally, like we have folks who are on the legacy stuff who want to get on the new function system written on Node, and they can't wait to use it. And I think that's the popularity of it. And I think we're fortunate enough where we've already have invested in this really great kind of cloud native stack. And so a lot of the work that we've done in the past couple of years is porting kind of that great stack over to Node using different patterns. Sometimes we used a sidecar for a very long time where we would proxy stuff to a Java-based sidecar. We then moved a whole bunch of stuff into native Node and back into Node and JavaScript, and port a bunch of stuff over, and now we have some stuff that's running daemons. But I think it's how do you integrate Node into the ecosystem of your company that you already have, especially at scale. You're not looking to replace everything. Most companies have spent millions or hundreds or tens of millions of dollars on infrastructure and platform, and I think you're here to like, how do I fit in? How do I get the same kind of best in breed RPC or performance, whatever it is, out of Node, and enable developers and better velocity and things like that.
Yeah, just to speak to Yunong's point, Pinterest also didn't do much different with our Python processes than our Node processes. We have instances that have X number of Python processes, and when we started calling Node through local HTTP protocol, we just added Y number of Node processes to our supervisor configuration, and that's how we stood those up. In terms of scaling, we utilize auto-scaling that signal off of CPU. What we found is that because a lot of the work we're putting on Node, especially with template rendering, CPU bound, so the scaling really just signals on CPU. And what we do find is that when traffic hits us, it's really like the template heavy rendering that causes our systems to really stretch. So with Pinterest, we can't leverage caching as much because we have an authenticated experience, not much duplication there for our staff. So template rendering is really our heaviest load, and Node's been awesome at giving us that workhorse process.
Yeah, I mean, I'm glad you mentioned the CPU utilization. I think that's the thing that's different with Node because
Single-threaded, single
CPU, and so how does that fit into your kind of infrastructure strategy, right? You usually, if you're on EC2 or some other infrastructure as a service provider, you're usually, for better cost, you're provisioning like the largest machines that you can provision, and so you're not just going to run one node instance and use one CPU out of the 16 or 32, and so there's lots of different strategies. Folks have talked about using Docker and Kubernetes. That's a really great way to have like orchestrator provision stuff for you, and other folks use things like Nginx in front as a proxy where you have multiple processes, but those I think are the differences. And I think the other thing to think about too is the non-blocking aspect of Node means that like in a traditional enterprise environment, most developers and engineers are familiar with kind of the blocking the mechanism, right? So if you use the Java or C++ or whatever, it's a different way to think about things, and there are different trade-offs. And so in a non-blocking world, if you have a large payload that comes in that you have to parse, you would introduce latency bubbles, right? And so at your like higher 99.9% latencies, they might be higher, but then your overall average could be lower. And so it's like, the strategy would be like to think about how you would explain and educate performance engineers or folks who go on call and like help them understand the different ecosystem. I'm also curious about like kind of tooling that folks are using, because we talk about there's hurricanes or people got to buy stuff on Black Friday, right? Like when there's problems, when you encounter problems with your Node installation, because it's not always perfect, right? Are there tools that you're using today that's really helpful? Are there things that you wish you had? Be really curious to find out from the panel.
So when we started with Node, we weren't using Docker. We were on individual VMs, like you just mentioned. So it was very inefficient. But we discovered Docker, and then that helps us to scale. And now we're into the clustering. So it's like taking it to another level. You can have basically 4 processes working on one process, but they all single-threaded, but they can still work together because they have the master. So the tooling that we typically use, outside of all the monitoring that we typically do, really, we treat all of our services just like you mentioned, like your Python services. It's very similar. The only thing that's different now is the clustering feature, which is making Node more on par with the other classical languages. So, but we're not doing anything out of the norm.
Yeah, I think at Lowe's we're the same way. It's pretty classical logging, alerting, operational metrics that are watched by our operations teams that kind of tell us, how Node is performing. The one thing you got to get to know is what good looks like, and make sure that you can, determine what bad looks like, so that you know when to alert and what to do. But as far as tooling, there isn't really anything special that we brought in. I know when we started using Node back 2015, 2016, since it was new to the company and it was open source, and we traditionally didn't do a lot of open source projects. One of the first questions that's asked is, well, what do we buy to monitor this stuff, right? Our operations team needs to have alerting. They need to have the logging in place. So, we worked with companies like New Relic and those that to put the monitoring in place, because a typical Java shop, we use typical Java tracing and monitoring. So this was a totally brand new thing that our operations team had to learn.
Yeah, just going off of that, it's funny because I was part of the web platform team when we decided to go to Node. This was not something that like SREs or anyone else at the company kind of looked at. So we were really the impetus behind moving to Node, and we really had to partner with the SREs, and we were doing the research on all the different tooling. They didn't have really the expertise there because they were Python, Java shops. So the way that Node even worked, and even things like NPM modules and deployment models, we had to kind of partner with them. And Node being JavaScript, and being able to take heap dumps and inspect them in Chrome, and all these things, these were things that the web team was doing, which I think is interesting. We were doing a lot more of this operational stuff than was traditional at Pinterest, I think.
So I'd love to kind of go down that path, because I think a lot of folks would benefit from hearing about maybe when as you're making migration of features or whatever, and you flip that switch, and then inevitably something breaks, right? So I think folks would love to hear about maybe some of those instances, maybe some gotchas that you've seen that would maybe help folks that are in this process now, and kind of how you dealt with them.
I mean, for us, I think it was interesting because when we first started, I think there was just the lack of visibility into the tools that are available. It turns out there are really great tools that do exist, things that let you, do things like postmortem molasses and sample the heap so you can figure out memory leaks, or profile the CPU, and all these tools kind of exist in various different places. And I think even today, there's some really great, brilliant people who kind of work in the open source community and who are contributing to these tools. But there's not really, and there's working groups obviously within the Node Foundation that's working on that stuff. But it's really hard to discover the set of tooling. I'm sure you guys kind of see a lot of shaking hands. Like, it's really hard to discover that unless you were originally working on that, or you worked with someone else who's worked on that. And so I think part of what I think would really help with the adoption in the enterprise, right, is like you've convinced your superiors, you've convinced the company, we're going to go run this stuff on Node. You flip the switch, and then when something goes wrong, you have to be able to demonstrate that you can solve those problems, right? And so, you were talking about Java and the traditional tools, and I think something that Java does do really well is it ships with a good set of tooling along with the runtime. So when you have problems, you can turn on things like Flight Recorder and like sample the heap. And we have all of that in Node. It's just it's not an easy place to go get all of that, right? And so I think maybe some of what I'm hearing is like if we can get to that kind of parity where we can have the tools easily accessible in one place with good documentation, that would really help the adoption.
Absolutely. Now, absolutely, I agree with that. Now, we started. So when we had Node, when we began with Node, we were beginning to become more agile. Agile is the word that everyone wants to use. At the time, we were becoming more agile. Before Node, we would deploy once a week, once every 2 weeks. But Node allows us to now deploy every day, multiple times a day. And that's the benefit that the business and product people are now seeing. Mm-hmm. The proof is in the pudding. We can talk about it all day long, but once they see the value, that's when the enterprise will start taking hold of this. And you have to show it. Sometimes you have to take risks in your blue-green deployments. Go ahead and set up another environment. But like if you have Kubernetes or some way or some cloud environment where you can stand up another, or some other cloud tool, stand up another environment. Stand up a parallel environment. Show it. Show the numbers. That's how we've been able to move forward. Right? The proof is in the pudding.
Yeah, I think that's how Node really took off at Lowe's. When he said go live, what was go live like? We were terrified, but we were confident, right? We flipped the switch and everything looked good. And then we started getting, reports from the business that there was, some anomalies on rendering of the page, right? So how do we debug it? One of the things that I would suggest is that you know your own code, but you know every package that you're putting in your code as well, pretty intimately, so you can go in there and figure out what that is. The way that the problems that we had, we fixed it relatively quickly, and that's what convinced our business that this is, and our technology leaders at Lowe's, that this was something that we really should start adopting. We were able to fix and deploy something to production in 15 minutes, right? We found the problem, we changed the code, we did a quick test, and it was out in production, and everything was fine. In the traditional Java world that we were in, that would have been impossible, right? We would have rolled back the whole deployment.
And I think the flip side for us was that Node's become such a critical part of our business now. We're doing it in reverse, which is like now we have problems that the tools don't solve. For example, when Node moved from V6 to a new version of V8, it broke a bunch of the profiling and postmortem tools. So we've now actually been investing very heavily our own engineering time to build and fix some of the tooling, working closely with the V8 team and the Node TSC to actually invest back into the ecosystem. So like, I think it's like this virtuous cycle, right? You get folks on board, it becomes really critical to the ecosystem, and then along the way they'll be able to help and sort of contribute back and make things better as well.
And we're trying to get better. And we're not good enough. We're good enough in regards to the tooling, but we need to get better at the tooling. That will allow us to coalesce in regards to on the enterprise.
And I think one thing, like everybody's here, so the thing I would want to say is like, the tooling is really critical, and it's not just like the 5 of us on the stage saying that, but I think it's everyone needs to participate and sort of talk about that and make it really, make an effort to say like, this is really important. It affects enterprise adoption, it affects everyone's adoption, and make it so that people get the visibility that they need on these tools. Because only with that effort of like everybody stepping in and chipping in will we see more of an uptick in that regard.
And on the people side too, like ownership of the service, runbooks, being able to really make it easy to onboard somebody to own the service and take care of runtime issues, I think is so key to success for these new services.
Cool. So I guess just sticking with maybe the tooling and you were talking about how it was hard to find tooling, but I don't know, were there things, did you just search? How did you find the tooling? I know you're saying Netflix is building some tooling now because it just doesn't exist, and so just wondering like, are there ways that you went looking for the tooling, how you found that tooling? I don't know if, do people agree that maybe finding tooling is kind of hard? I don't know.
I mean, I think it's a combination, right? It's like, you first have to know what problem you want to solve, and generally the first thing people do would be like, they would Google, how do you fix a memory leak? Right? And like, boom, there's like these 3 blog posts, and they link to tools, and you try to download the tools, and then you're like trying to compile them, and it doesn't compile, and these tools were last maintained 2 years ago with some person, so you reach out to that person, and eventually maybe you find like the diagnostic working group, and then you go to a working group meeting, or you file an issue on GitHub, and I think that's kind of the process we're in now, right? And people Google, but I think a lot of people probably don't realize that there is a really robust set of tooling that does exist. And I think, it's on us and it's on the community to make that tooling much more visible and more supported. And I know we've been talking in the diagnostic working group about like tiers of support for these tools, right? What does it mean for a tool to be tier 1 support? Does that mean that it has to be working with an LTS release in Node? So like a good question I think for the group and for everyone out there is, there is tooling today that like helps you solve and debug memory leaks, right? There's tooling that helps you solve performance problems like profiling the CPU, et cetera. Do we feel like these tools are critical enough to your business and to the enterprise and to everyone's adoption such that they should not be broken with LTS releases in Node, right? And like, it's an open question. I don't know the answer to that, but like these are the things that people I think we.
No, I can tell what our operations team would say. Yeah.
Right, and this is like I think good feedback to give to the diagnostic working group because they're looking for those data points and be like, does this need to be the tier 1 support? And I think for folks who are delivering the news, right, or you have to buy stuff at Lowe's or binging on Netflix or going on Pinterest, like that's really important for your customer base. And so obviously we know what the answer is in this panel, but it's really I think important for us to give that data points back to the TSC and the working group so they know as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So when we went live, how do we find tools? Well, we partnered with an organization that was supporting Node, right? So they kind of helped us learn the tools. So we were very new to it, traditional Java shop. So they kind of told us how to investigate issues, and then we onboarded people onto the organization that were familiarizing themselves with Node. I was going to say Lowe's, and then hired more people that were sort of experts in Node as well to kind of build that base. And it was, like you said, critical to get the operations team familiar with how all this stuff worked, what the tooling was available, and how they could use it to diagnose problems.
We actually just ran into stuff and Googled like heck. It's just
for sure.
it was like there was, I think one of the first one was like a memory leak, and we were just like, and the SRE team was like, so I actually looked at Google and Yunong's video on memory leaks and node introspection was up there. And I actually got a VM of Solaris to try and inspect a core dump with some tools, and I was just like, oh, I don't know. I don't know about this. I don't know if this is, if I should put this in the run book.
But I'm sure most people don't know that like we've actually done a lot of work to port those tools over to Linux now, and there's a project called L on Node.
This was a few years ago.
Yeah, I know, but like like a lot of people, like we've done a lot of work in that area now, which is really great. But I'm sure not a lot of people know about that project, right? It's like, how do you go find about that?
Exactly, discoverability.
Do we care when versions of Node that gets released break stuff from that set of tools? Probably not until you have a memory leak, and then you're like, right? So it's one of those things where I think it's really I think important to think about and keep. We don't just want like performance and language features. I think stability is really important. Tooling is really important, right? And things like that really matter when you're at scale, when your business is something is business critical.
Right. Right. And just so you know, the source of the memory leak was PubSub library that was meant for the client only. And our there was a process, long-lived process, is just collecting subs. So it was awesome.
Cool. So, I mean, we're about out of time. I don't know if anybody has any sort of final thoughts or recommendations for folks, or just anything, or we can say we're done. But does anybody have any?
I would say that whenever I speak, I typically tell those listening to me, you can own your own destiny. Now, typically people don't think of developers and engineers as artists, but we are. We can take something so abstract and create something dynamic and unique. And we need to continue to harness that and continue to lean on each other as a community because we are creative. We are the ones that can make things happen. And I just want to continue to encourage you to take the ownership and communicate with each other and create things and make this world more beautiful. My code, sometimes I think it's beautiful, but sometimes it's not. But I'm just saying, we just continue to create, continue to be who you are.
Awesome.
Yeah.
All right. Well, let's, yeah. So, yeah. Awesome. Well, yeah, so I really appreciate everybody taking the time today. This is a great conversation. And, yeah, just thank you and thank everyone for sticking around to the end. So,
Thank you, everyone.
thanks.
Thanks.